Mr. Danielson will be filming us today. So thank you for being here, Bruce.
Councilor Rolfing.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to offer an amendment to this.
Pardon me, Mr. Mayor?
Yes, thank you. I've got it.
Say that again. Oh, yes, I'm sorry. I would move to approve this. Thank you.
Councilor Rolfing has made a motion to approve this particular ordinance. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a second. Councilor Rolfing.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
I don't even know where to start with the garbage that just went on here, accusing us of taking bribes and getting more money when we leave and that kind of thing. I'm sorry, it just sickens me. I got into this position because I wanted to do what was right for Sioux Falls. The night in 2010 I was elected, I realized I wasn't going to get elected by over 50%, and I felt sick. I didn't really feel like I was elected. Never have until 2014, when I was elected by 65%. Somebody out there thought some of us were doing a pretty good job, moving the city along, doing things that need to be done, and keeping it moving. I apologize if some people think that I made money at this. I didn't. I haven't. This has been a labor of love. And I think a labor of love that can move things better by having each individual candidate being elected by a 50% plus one. So in that light, I would like to add, I move that to amend section 8 to delete parts A and B and replacing them with the following. All elections by majority. In all elections for elective office within the city, including at-large council members and district council members and mayor, if no candidate in a race involving 3 or more candidates receive a majority of the votes cast for that particular elective office, a runoff election shall be held 3 weeks from the date of the first election. At the runoff election, the 2 candidates receiving the highest number of votes for the first election shall be on the ballot. However, if there is a tie for second place in the first election and there is no tie for first place, all times second place candidates shall be placed along with their first place candidate on a ballot for a runoff election. The runoff election shall be held at the same polling places and shall be conducted, returned, and canvassed in the same manner as the first election. The person receiving the highest number of votes at the runoff election is elected.
Second the amendment.
There is now a motion to amend this particular ordinance. I'm not going to read it in its entirety. Council, you all have a copy, and that has been seconded. Councilor Rolfing, before I go to your colleagues, any additional comments on this?
Yeah, I would.
Thank you.
I have a number of comments, and I appreciate everybody thinking this thing through and working with it. I just don't see it as a tough one. The money, if the people are going to run, having 1 extra or 2-3 extra weeks of election is not as much of a money commitment as it is a time commitment. It's out knocking on doors. It's going to every one of the places that that you need to go to make your presence felt. It's going to the debates. It's, we have people that don't even show up for debates, candidates. And that's just wrong. It doesn't say that they're in it for the right reasons. The status quo requires a plurality vote now, meaning 34% or more. They moved that up from a straight plurality because they thought that maybe 20% wouldn't be good. So I'm just saying from 34 to 50. And that means that that could win an election with only 34% of the vote. But it fails to recognize that there could be 66% of the public vote that was against that candidate, or at least not for that candidate. How can you, the cost of another election is not a problem. The problem is a plurality of citizens that don't have, a plurality does not have the final decision on who's going to represent them. This is not about candidates or the elitists taking over. It's about our citizens having a final say on who represents them. This amendment will bring parity between the mayor and the council. Two candidates running for the same office have a better chance to define themselves and their platforms than they do with 5 or 6 or 3 or 4. Getting it down to 2, you have a chance to really determine which one of those 2 you really want, what platform you're voting for. Since 2000, just to give you an example, a majority election of the council would have resulted in only 1 additional runoff election that wasn't held already. Cost is not a consideration here, as a single council runoffs are infrequent and are always budgeted for. It's the cost of democracy. A runoff will provide for the voting public, with the opportunity to directly compare the 2 top candidates and make the final decision on who will represent them. And let me assure you, there have been no special interest in the involvement of this. I've been thinking about this since the day I was first elected to this council. Mr. Paulson and I use his name lovingly, I've known John for 40 plus years. He's a good man, and he does not deserve to be dragged under the table like that. There are no special interests in this. When I was, as I said, when I opened up, I'm here to do what I think and what the voters think is right for the city of Sioux Falls, and I think this is what it is. So I would appreciate your support on this issue.
Councilor Mott?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councilor Rolfing. Thank you, too, for those folks who have thought this through and had constructive comments. I want you to think about the math involved in a 34% vote win. That means 66% of the people voted against you and you won anyway. And that has, you can call it whatever you want in terms of when this is coming to public, but that has bothered me from the day that it passed. 66% of the people voted against you, but you won the seat anyway. Congratulations, I think. I really struggle with this. I really am at a point where this city council, I don't care that we don't make as much money as the mayor, and I don't care that we don't have the same amount of power. The city council has a lot to do with a huge budget, has a lot to do with everything that happens in this community on a day-to-day basis. And if we can't get 50 plus 1% of the vote to elect the people that sit in these important chairs, I'm worried about what happens to this government then. And then I would speak directly to my colleague, Councilor Staley, and remind her that in 2010 I didn't make 50% of the vote. I had 48 point something. If we had had a runoff, that whole 2010 election may have ended differently. And I would like those citizens who voted in those elections where that vote is split in that way, it was split by 4 people. Why do those folks who voted for the 2 people that were votes 3 and 4, why do they not get to have a say in the final vote? I don't understand that kind of thinking. It isn't about power, it isn't about money. And I want you to also think then historically about this community and think about who are the people that are most likely to these races for these city council. They're the ones that work the hardest. You look at Councilor Kermit Staggers and you think about how much money he did not spend on these election campaigns, and you think about how much time he spent knocking on doors, how much time he spent going door to door and speaking one-on-one with people. He didn't spend money, he worked hard, and that's how he got here. And I would tell you that's exactly how Councilor Staley got here as well. She didn't spend money to get to this seat. She has worked really hard. That is what campaigning is about. It is not about how much money you spend. It is about how much you care about this community and how hard you work to campaign. And if it's okay with you to have 66% of the people vote against you, then go ahead and turn this one down. But this one matters to the people who vote. I ask for your support.
Councilor Chair Kiley?
Thank you. An election that is based on plurality, our current system, in my opinion, looks out for the good of the candidate. Let's instead look at the citizens, the individuals that take the time to cast their votes. Why is 34% the magic number? Why not 35% or 25% for that matter? The status quo, 34% allows a candidate to win a council election, as Councilor Erpenbach and Rolfing have already stated, even though 66% of the individuals voted against them. The biggest point for me is shouldn't the aim of any election be to gauge the will of the majority of the individuals that took the time to cast their vote? Opponents use examples of the legislature here in South Dakota, the governor and the county commissioner elections, to bolster their argument against this amendment. It needs to be pointed out, however, that these elected officials are elected using the party system. In fact, they have to compete in 2 races, a primary and a general election. Furthermore, there's been a lot stated about deep pockets and elitists. I will remind you that the top 2 fundraisers in the last municipal election actually lost their election. And it also occurred in a very notable election in 2012 involving council members. It is also not factual to say that voter turnout declines in a runoff election. In fact, the last time a runoff took place in 2010, voter turnout actually saw more voters than the initial election. Again, more votes cast in the runoff than in the initial election. If the majority requirement had been in place, as Councilor Rolfing stated in 2000, the city would have only required to hold 1 additional runoff election. That's 1 additional election in the last 9 elections. As I stated earlier, let's look out for the citizens. Let's look out for the voters. What it comes down to me is, shouldn't the aim of any election be to gauge the will of the majority? 34% or any other arbitrary number below 50% plus 1 does not represent the majority of the individuals that took the time to cast their vote. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment.
Councilor Nice.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Welcome.
The first thing I want to say is my opposition to this is in principle. I don't question the motives of those who made the motion, and it's too bad it kind of devolved the way it did, so hopefully we can stick to civil discourse. So to me, the idea seems logical. I mean, I heard it out, but the study of the data shows it is problematic, and it is a solution looking for a problem. Most council races have clear winners historically. Very few are razor-thin margins. We already required 34%, which is more than a simple plurality. And for me, that requirement provides a firewall against a fringe candidate. So if you have maybe 8 candidates in the race, you don't have a fracturing of the votes, and somebody slips in with 12%. Most elections nationwide are simple plurality. Let's just personalize it for me. I was elected with 48% of the vote with 4 candidates. Am I illegitimate? I mean, I don't think so. I'm not ashamed of that. I don't think it's a problem. The next thing is the mayor and the council, they're not the same, and for a few reasons. The mayor is perceived differently. Look at the turnout. It's substantially higher. If you look at mayoral elections and then you look at the undervotes for at-large, you'll see thousands of people who fill in the box for mayor, and they don't even bother to fill in that next box for a councilor. The mayor is a strong mayor. To me, one bad mayor is a disaster. One bad councilor, an annoyance, a nuisance. I'm not trying to minimize our job. I'm just saying the mayor runs the city. There is a difference. There's substantially less turnout in the off years where I ran, for example. The turnout was very, very low. If we had a runoff, I can't even imagine what the turnout would be if it was just a council. I mean, I look at the school board. It's sad. I wish it wasn't that way, but it is. Very few people are going to show up for a runoff. And as an example, let's say 2,000 people vote in the first election, and somebody gets 45% of the vote. And then in the second election, 1,500 or 1,000 show up and they get 65% of the vote. How did that add any more legitimacy to their election? I just don't see it. So if we take a look at the undervotes in the mayoral election years, you will see, and there's a chart on the next page. Look at the number of undervotes. That just goes to point out how many people just don't fill the box. So what I'm trying to get at is that I see the people will turn out for a mayoral runoff. I'm not so sure they're going to show up for a council runoff. And then the turnout differences, again, you can see the turnout. And I do want to, the turnout is much lower. I do want to address the mayoral runoff in 2010. Looking back over the last 20 years and looking at other jurisdictions, runoffs are very, very low turnout. This was an exception, and I think those of you who can think back to history know why. The person who was running again, the two candidates running, there was one running against our current mayor. There was a lot of people who were, I'm just going to say it, who were kind of freaking out about the idea of that person becoming mayor. And there was a lot of turnout. It was higher than the first election. But that was an anomaly. I'll just say that if you look at if you look at our turnout elections in other jurisdictions, they're pitiful. So as an example, the off-year council runoff in 2000, the first election there was a 15% turnout. In the runoff there was a 10% turnout. A third of the people that showed up in the first one didn't bother to show up in the second one. As I said, how does that add any clarity or legitimacy to the first election? To me, if we were going to change this, it should be done in a deliberate fashion. We should have a discussion about it. We need to define if there's a problem, look at the pros and cons, there's a lot of ways to vote. I mean, somebody pointed out that you can do instant runoff voting and ranked voting. We could research what other jurisdictions have done. It really should be at a committee and not just tagged on to an amendment to an otherwise mundane ordinance. Races are already meaningful. Elections where the candidate wins with less than 50% of the vote are meaningful. They happen at every level, every year. No one questions the legitimacy of those candidates. With a 34% floor, once again, you're going to have to get a decent, substantial cross-section of the electorate with 3 or more candidates on the ballot. Getting 50% of the vote in a substantially lower turnout election, to me, I don't necessarily see the benefit. So the conclusion I get to is more runoff elections will cost the taxpayer more money and candidates more money. All candidates. I'm not going to make this a rich versus poor. It's just going to drive up the cost of elections. If you don't think we're going to have to send out more postcards and spend more money, and you're just going to knock on doors, it's just fantasy. Knocking on doors is the #1 thing you can do, but you're going to have to do bulk mail or something. Runoff elections promote voter fatigue. They make the election cycles longer. People don't want to go through elections even longer and longer, and then they're going to have a school board a couple weeks later. Runoff elections are low turnout. For council elections, we can see that. There is no problem. We already require 34%. That's more than a plurality. So in the end, voter turnout will not increase. Campaign costs will increase. Taxpayers will pay more. Election cycles will increase. And in most cases, the results won't change. Vote no on this unnecessary amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Sellery.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think the first thing that we all have to do that's most important is to kind of take ourselves and our own futures out of this equation and make sure we're voting on what's best for the city. And I know that part hasn't been easy. We can say we're all doing that. I would hope we are. The idea behind this is to set the goal a little higher for somebody to win a seat. And the goal of the elections is to find our best candidates. So it's a noble idea. To address a couple of the things that have come up, I've never bought that it's a have versus have-nots argument as far as who's going to win office. I agree what's already been said. I won't go through all of it, but it does come down to most of it. You do have to raise funds, but you do have to knock on doors, get the signs out, go to the programs you're invited to the forums. You have invitations to certain groups, and there's lots of them out there. And I think any candidate with a good message in this town is going to get the word out. And I think we've seen from recent examples, we've seen a number of candidates and officials who are very good and effective at working through the media to get their message out, both local media and social. So I think folks get their word out without spending money. So I don't necessarily buy the Rockefeller issue that some people just won't be able to run. I do agree with one thing I heard on the $6,000 to $10,000 probably range to run for council. If you were to have a runoff and go another 3 weeks, I don't doubt you'd have to have another mailer or something to that effect and maybe spend I'll just take a guesstimate at 1,000, but I can tell you that my personal goal would be to go back to the boxes, the brochures I hadn't handed out yet, and take them to the doors I haven't knocked on yet. So I do think it comes down to a lot of the working it out. There is a good point brought out by Councilor Neitzert as far as the turnout for these elections. But I think what we're doing here is we're just kind of really tearing down the council in general, like we're not as important as the mayor. The mayor's a whole different level. You know, this is the legislative branch of our government. This is the checks and balances. This is, we come here every week to work with him and hold the purse strings on the budget and do what we do. So, well, yes, off-year elections are down. They're down locally. They are down nationally. That's just the way it goes. Doesn't make the people involved in government or who are running any less important. And the job they do any less important. So, I guess where I lean, and this is our weekly cliffhanger, it seems every week we've got something where, what are we doing this week? But it leans this way to me. To vote this through is going to make a challenge.
Chair Kiley.
I will not be repetitive.
Okay.
There's been, we just had the discussion about actually lowering the bar for the mayoral election. What we've been discussing previously for councilors is actually raising the bar. As an educator for 33 years, I strive to raise the bar every day in my classrooms. I strive to get the students to think beyond what they thought was possible for themselves. I was also encouraged by my administrators to raise the bar. And I strongly feel that our efforts, our combined efforts administratively as well as individual teachers to raise the bar, paid off in students that were prepared to be good citizens and to contribute to society. So for that reason, I don't see what is wrong with raising the bar for the counselors. Because we are about to embark on authorizing a nearly $1.5 billion budget for the city. Now, if that's not an important role, then I don't know what is. Thank you.
A roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Staley?
And we're voting on the amendment, just for some clarification, so yes.
Councilor
No,
Staley.
oh,
Yeah,
no.
Thank you.
Erickson?
No.
Erpenbach?
Yes.
Kiley?
Yes.
Neitzert?
No.
Rolfing?
Yes.
Selberg?
Yes.
Starr?
No.
Mayor votes yes. That is passed 5-4. Item 6. Oh, no, I'm sorry. It's an amendment.
Yep.
It's an amended main. Actually, it's an amendment to the ordinance.
Y'all come back now. Here.
Security, escort this gentleman out, please.
Come on, Soda Pop, let's go.